Are you hopeful that they could find a resolution to this strike action with the nurses?
Oh, I hope so. I mean, I have to compliment that last young woman who was speaking. I mean, what a lot of sense she speaks, and so thoughtful and compassionate, and speaking not just on her own sake, not just talking for herself, but talking about the importance of the National Health Service and how they feel that they are fighting for the National Health Service too.
How close or far away do you think the government is with all of the unions? We're looking at the 1st of February, National Day of Action, not calling it a general strike, but hundreds of thousands of people going on strike that day.
It's such a mess, isn't it? It's such a mess, and I do think it could have been avoided if the government hadn't just left it until the very last minute. I think they were posturing for such a long time, saying they were going to be hard and they weren't going to talk and they weren't prepared to negotiate, and then now they say they are. But I do think that people have got themselves dug into different trenches now, and it's really hard to get out of it.
But we've seen the inflation figures for December. They are coming down. We heard from the Chancellor this morning. He was saying, yes, it's going in the right direction, but we're a long way to go. And we heard from the Immigration Minister, sat where you were in the last hour, and he said that the last thing that the economy needs right now is spiralling inflation again because of pay rises.
I understand that. And it's good news, obviously, that the inflation rate has gone down. But remember, it's still the third worst inflation figure for 30 years. So yes, it's going down, but it's going down from a very high peak. And the amount, obviously, that the government is offering is well below the inflation rate to the various public sector unions. And so they are effectively being asked to take a pay cut. Yeah,
but the government is saying that if they were sat here, they would say, we need to do that in order to stop inflation going up again.
I understand that, but I think we also need to be quite clear about what it is, therefore, that the government is saying, which is that if they want to tackle inflation, it has to be on the back of cutting the pay of public sector workers. So that's deflationary if they're getting less money, effectively.
I wonder if we could just stay on money for a second. I want to ask you about this disgraceful police officer who raped so many women during his 18 years in the police service. The Mayor of London, Labour Mayor of London, has said that he will do everything he possibly can to make sure he doesn't get his pension. We heard from the government saying they don't think he should get his pension. What does Labour think?
I personally think that the pension shouldn't be relevant. I mean, it's not for me to say, it's obviously for a judge to say, but I would certainly expect him not to be in a position to need to be spending any money from any pension and spending the rest of his life in jail. That's my view.
And what's your view on the fact that he managed to get away with this for such a long time?
So I think there's lots of things about this. I think, how was he allowed to join the police? Why did his colleagues allow him to continue to behave? And I'm not saying in the way that he was obviously behaving at home, but there must have been signs. Why was nobody saying how concerned they were about his behaviour and how appropriate it was for him to be a police officer? I do think that we need to have much stronger vetting and training, and we need to have a culture within the police where it's OK to say, I'm quite concerned about X's behaviour. Did you see that WhatsApp message? Did you hear the way that he spoke about so-and-so? And actually reporting it. Because there are some really good people in the Metropolitan Police and really dedicated people, and they are being completely undermined by the behaviour of these appalling men who have been allowed to be in the police force for so long, abusing women, murdering women, raping women. I mean, no wonder confidence in the Metropolitan Police is being undermined. We have a new leader of the Metropolitan Police who's come back from retirement from 4 years in order to help clear it up. And he turns up and yet another case arises. I really hope that it is successful, but what we think is that there should be national standards when it comes to vetting, training, all of these things. We think that actually the Home Secretary should be much more proactive than she is, and making sure this is not just a Met problem, but making sure that she recognises that it is a problem in relation to police forces up and down the country. And we need to make sure that we have, and if we get into power, we will introduce national standards, throughout all the police forces. We will expect a certain standard when it comes to vetting, when it comes to training, and when it comes to chucking people out. You've got to chuck people out if they're inappropriate.
Where do you stand on the gender reform bill?
So I think, again, it's another one of these messes. I think that if we had a government that understood about governing, they would have been consulting with the Scottish Parliament. It's not as though it's a great surprise that the Scottish Parliament was going to be introducing this legislation. I do think the Scottish Parliament and the UK Parliament should have been discussing these matters for a very long time before they did. I think that it is extraordinary that Kemi Badenoch arrived like the day before they passed the legislation in order to discuss it. And I think what's happened is that the Scottish nationalists are now using this as an opportunity to argue for, for nationalism and for separation and for independence. And the Tories seem to be using this as an opportunity to spark off more culture wars. And whilst they're fighting, and they've been squaring up to each other for I don't know how long, and now they're off. Now they're fighting. And they're fighting on the backs of some of the most vulnerable people in the United Kingdom. People who are trans are more likely than anyone else to be assaulted. They have terrible, some people have such terrible lives and suffer such appalling prejudice. And they're certainly not reassuring women who are concerned about safe spaces for women. I mean, none of this seems to be part of the issue. I was there for part of the debate yesterday, and people just seem to be screaming at each other. There was much more heat than light. And it is a tragedy. And we should actually have the people who are really affected by this legislation at the forefront of our minds when we decide what the best thing to do is.
Should the bill be reformed so that the age is more than 16? Where do you stand on 16?
Well, you know that Labour's position is certainly that, legally people are it's difficult because people are people and hard cut-offs always don't really fit people.
Nevertheless, we have to abide by
But
them.
we have to do something. So we tend to have a kind of... It's much more nuanced when you're 16, going 16 to 18. So there are certain things you can do. But like, for example, if you join the military, you can't use weapons, but you can join the army at 16 or 17. You can marry, but you have to marry with the consent of your parents. So there's a kind of... So I think, Keir at the weekend was expressing his concern about a hard cut-off being at 16, where actually we think if there needs to be a hard cut-off, then it's probably more likely to be near 18. But what we do need to do is we need to have a proper consultation. And it's certainly right that the Gender Recognition Act, which is a UK-based act, before the Scots introduced their own version, is really out of date and does need to be looked at again. We need to have a proper consultation about it, and some of the more inhumane aspects of the Gender Recognition Act need to be looked at again.
OK, it's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Lovely to see you too.
Much appreciated.